Do you personally know a serial criminal? What were they like and why did they end someone? I worked with someone that ended someone in self-defense. I didn't believe his story, which is probably why he served time for the incident. The story he told me was that he was having relations with some girl and her husband came home and found them and then immediately attacked him. He said he didn't want to fight him but ended him in self-defense. Some months after we hired him, we got word that he also had some child cruelty in his criminal record. Once that word spread around, he disappeared. He had stolen some stuff from coworkers before he left. 2 weeks later, he was robbed and terminated outside a bar near work. Well, I guess we can call that one universal karma? Story 2. My wife recently received a call from one of her family members that shocked her. Her uncle was arrested in Michigan for a termination that happened like 20 years ago. Apparently, a substance deal went bad and he had ended this woman and then fled the state. For the next 20 years, he was completely normal, despite being investigated and questioned on 2 separate occasions, both of which he was able to keep hidden from the family. He recently returned to Michigan and was arrested due to DNA linking him to the termination and is now on a $1 million bond. The whole family was shocked as they never knew. Story 3. I knew her in school about a year before she did anything. She really wanted a baby and ended up committing a notorious crime involving a pregnant woman in an attempt to take her child. She lured the woman to a motel under the guise of selling baby clothes and then violently attacked her there. When I knew her, she was nice, if a bit snooty. She was much closer to my friend than me, but if I was given a lineup of everyone I went to school with, she wouldn't have made top 10 potential individuals who terminate. Just Googled her. She served 8 years and has since been released. Story 4. Normal family man, dad, mom, 3 children. They lived in front of the house where we moved when I was around 11. Everything was normal. We weren't the closest neighbors, just an always greet them with a smile kind of relationship. When I was around 16, he ended his wife with a knife in his house in front of his children. They were kids. I think their brains made up a story about a monster when they were in court. They still love his dad, visited him in jail, and moved back with him after he was released years after. Story 5. Our neighbor was an amazing family friend. I thought she was my grandma until I was about 10. When I was about 3, her brother ended their mom. I don't know how, just that it happened. One of my earliest memories is helping clean out her house. He was schizophrenic and thought she was going to end him. He went to a mental institution, got properly medicated, and our friend kept close to him. She has a twin sister who reacted differently than her, so I didn't actually know of the twin sister's existence until I was about 15. When our friend passed away, my mom started talking to the brother more often. Our friend asked her to make sure he was taken care of, and we were her family as she fell out of touch with her family after the incident. He's actually very sweet. Acts a bit like a child, but in a sweet way. He loves animals. Our friend talked about my sister and I a lot with him because we work with animals, so he loves hearing about that. He's very polite. He sometimes asks for very small things and thanks my mom a million times for whatever it is. Story 6. My grandpa's friend had a wife that was cheating on him. The husband didn't really care until he found out that she was leaving him. When the wife came home, the husband terminated her. Police were called because the guy the wife was cheating on called them since he was worried about her not coming back to him at a certain time. When the police came to the house, they could see smoke in the back and caught the husband. My grandpa visits the husband every now and then in jail. Story 7. I know too, allegedly, there was a couple who used to come to open board game night at our FLGS, friendly local game store. They seemed to be okay people. He was a veteran and they had adopted a special needs kid when he was like 12 or 13, so they seemed like decent people. Something I felt though was always off about her. Their adoptive kid was deaf and they never let him interact with anyone, and she pretended to know sign language when it was clear she was faking it. I always felt something was off about her. Fast forward 8 months and we hear their trailer burned down and their adopted son tragically didn't survive. About a month later, it came out that they were believed to be responsible for his death and had set the fire to hide what happened. One's in jail, the other's out on bail, but will be back in jail soon, I hope. Trust your instincts on people, I guess. Story 8. When I was a kid in Mexico, my sister was best friends with this girl. She was a really sweet girl, kind of funny, awesome. She had a bright future. We moved away and later it was discovered that her dad and older brothers were criminals. Her dad was arrested and is in jail at the moment. He was charged with kidnapping and God knows what else. Her brothers weren't arrested. The local community didn't like the fact that she was related to a kidnapper, especially because a lot of kids go missing in Mexico City, and they began to pester her. She was a teenager. She didn't know anything. Her brothers got angry and discharged a weapon at some guys that were pestering her and got sent to jail themselves. I don't know what happened to her mom. I know my sister's friend is going through a lot of stuff at the moment. She began to drink and use substances. She never really recovered from what happened. I seriously hope she someday does. She was a good person. Her brothers were awesome. I was just a kid when I met them. I hung out a lot at their place. Their dad was cool and quiet. Her mom babysat me sometimes and helped out when my dog was pregnant. Her brothers was awesome. Now, mind you, I was about 8 at the time, and little kids aren't known for being objective. They all seemed like a good family. I had no idea what they were really like. Story 9. Technically, it was self-defense. Happened up north a few years ago in a state in the Rust Belt. So, Buddy, let's call him Jack, got into an altercation with a man at his work, a bar. The man is intoxicated and is refused service and is not taking no for an answer. Jack and a fellow bouncer proceed to take him outside, get him off the premises since he's threatening staff and making a scene. The intoxicated guy gets violent with them. Jack is over 200 pounds of competitive bodybuilder and side hustles as a personal trainer. Jack decks him once in the face and the person is out. So Jack and the other bouncer leave the intoxicated person where he passed out. And this is where trouble begins because it was the middle of winter in the Rust Belt. You know how bad Chicago was with the polar vortex? Well, the intoxicated guy never came to and was later found outside and didn't survive the night. Security cameras caught the altercation and Jack knocking the person out. Jack and the bouncer go to court, but witness statements all corroborate, saying the intoxicated person was being extremely belligerent. There isn't sufficient evidence to charge them with anything, so not long after, Jack is at home minding his own business when 3 bereaved family members of the terminated person decide to break into his home and teach Jack a lesson with a baseball bat. But somehow Jack managed to overpower the intruders and stop them until the police arrived. Jack is all in the clear because he was defending himself against armed intruders. However, he's got a reputation now and decides that he's not sticking around town anymore. So he moves to where I live, party for school, mostly to get away from all of that riffraff. He's an upstanding guy, honestly, real nice, and doesn't like to talk about the incident. He just got caught in a terrible situation with terrible people. Moral of the story is don't get intoxicated and start things in the middle of winter in the Midwest. Story 10. I live in a small town around 10,000 people. There was a family that was running 3 stores and living in the middle of the town. I didn't know them personally, but my grandpa did, and often he recalls the story. Everybody knew them and they knew everybody. They were very influential, almost celebrities. They had 2 daughters that were 10 and 14. They were really talented and kind girls that had a large group of friends and were really friendly. The husband was a close friend of my grandpa. They went to school together. He was the best student and everybody said that he is going to be a successful person. And they were a happy family. However, one night the husband took a double barrel, terminated his wife in front of his scared daughters before terminating them too. He ended his own life after that. To this day, the reason of the terminations is unknown, but my grandpa told me that they had some extreme financial issues. You don't even know how shocked the whole town was. It was all over the news. Their house is now abandoned in the middle of the town, destroyed, and for almost 10 years now put up on sale. Some people said that nobody wants to buy that house because people say that some paranormal stuff is going on in there. My grandpa was emotionally destroyed after that incident. Story 11. When I met my wife, she was hanging out with this other dude. They were not dating, but just sort of hung out together. He had a motorbike and would take her for rides. At least that's what she told me. When I entered the picture, the dynamic changed a bit, of course. Dude started bragging about the size of his parts, lying about stuff. Always tried getting into petty contests with me, like who can drink a beer the fastest, and was getting more and more of a nuisance. But the stories got taller and taller. I got the girls, so I was quite relaxed about his antics. I put his whole bragging down to my presence. Typical male I am the alpha behavior, if you will. My wife was not so amused, so she faded him out. Anyway, fast forward about 10 years. We've been married for 3 or 4 years when suddenly my wife's cell rings. She answers the phone and all color drops from her face. It's our former friend. He is calling from a closed, as in you don't get to leave, mental hospital. Apparently, he settled down, got a girlfriend and a dog, and they moved into a nice apartment together. And one day, he starts hearing voices and follows the advice the voices are giving him. Believing he had to save the world, he fatally attacked his girlfriend, and when the dog started barking, it was harmed too. He was very sorry about having to end the dog, but he offered to meet up sometime and watch a movie at his hospital. They have movie nights every week, and he wanted to take my wife on a cruise as soon as they let him out because he had work in the hospital and no expenses, so he figured he might be quite rich. The call went on for a few minutes, and my wife was shell-shocked afterwards. She's as tough as a bag of nails, so I was quite worried. I called the hospital, and they told me that he wouldn't get out anytime soon. He was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, if I recall correctly, after the termination. It seems like he started hearing voices and just snapped. Story 12. I worked with this odd-looking dude who immigrated from Russia a few years ago. We shared the love of going outside into the forests and dancing to loud techno trance music. This one time, I heard about a party over the weekend and sent him a message about it. So yeah, I arrived with my friends and we had a good time, and around 3 a.m., I saw that this dude arrived as well. He was noticeably spiked on something and just had a good time. At some point, it seemed that his trip took him to some darker place, and when we sat to have a smoke, he felt safe to share with me that he was a soldier in the Russian army and fought in the Chechen War. Quickly, he delved into some dark details about terminating families and just cleansing whole villages of people. I left the company shortly after to attend higher education, and even though he tried to stay in contact with me, I really wanted none of that noise in my personal life, which was hectic as it was. Story 13. I had a client once who had spent more than 20 years in a psych hospital. I could see from records she had terminated her husband. She was really quite pleasant, very supportive family, including her adult children and grandchildren. And one day she told me why. She was diagnosed with one of the big mental illnesses. She discovered her husband committing acts of cruelty against their children. He said he would just tell everyone she was delusional, so she would be hospitalized, no one would believe her, and he would do whatever he wanted, so she terminated him. Kids went to a good, stable home with people who could raise them safely. She went to a forensic hospitalization for decades. Seemed like a great plan to me that worked out well. I believed her due to the nature of the family involvement. It was kind of none of my business in relation to my work besides, of course, monitoring some safety concerns. She didn't ever seem dangerous to me, and there was no record of any other violent incidents. People who are institutionalized for a long time always show it, in my experience, so there were ways in which she was off, and she still had the illness, of course, so who knows, she could have terminated a perfectly innocent man. Still seemed quite nice to me. Story 14. My uncle was in prison for the majority of my life up until he passed away unexpectedly last year. He filed for a divorce from his wife when his children were pretty young. Apparently, he was under the assumption that filing for the divorce himself gave some sort of guarantee that he would receive custody of their kids. When the kids went to the ex-wife instead, he snapped. He thought her divorce lawyer had somehow rigged the system, tracked him down, and terminated him in an alley shortly after. He was on the run for a couple of weeks before eventually turning himself in. I hardly remember meeting him because I was a baby, but we would chat on the phone perhaps 4 times a year up until he passed away. If you didn't know he had terminated someone, you probably wouldn't have never guessed that he had it in him. He was very fond of science and would often talk to me about my interests in biology and ecology. He also really liked vocal and instrumental music and always encouraged me to pursue my interest in both. When I graduated from college, his gift to me was a year's subscription to National Geographic, which I found very thoughtful. All in all, I think he was a victim of a really bad decision made at the lowest point in his life. There's no excusing it and you can't come back from it, but I don't think he was ever inherently evil or anything like that. Story 15. I met my best friend, Greg, in school when we were 10 years old. His mother was a transient and his father was never part of the picture. He lived with his grandmother when I first met him, but he was handed off to different relatives frequently. We were both social outsiders with identical interests. Our commonality led to a deep bond that formed instantly and only further solidified in the years to follow. To this day, I've never met a more gifted child or individual. Though I lack cognizance as a child in hindsight, I consider him a genius. A complete lack of comprehension pushed me to compete with him academically. While perpetually in his dust, I still pursued goals I was incapable of reaching. In that respect, he truly made me a better person. A year later, I entered my first middle school relationship with Emily. She was my first kiss, and we even lasted 9 months, an eternity by middle school standards. After breaking up, Emily and I maintained a close friendship. We hung out on the weekends and called each other daily, mostly listening and talking about music, Stabbing Westward, STP, Radiohead, 9 Inch Nails, etc., and school drama. By the time the 3 of us entered high school, we became a tight 4-person group that included Greg's cousin. Now that we were older and licensed to drive, we skipped afternoon classes most days and hung out every day of the week. Greg's cousin got a job at a struggling local grocery store, so the 3 of us decided to apply and we all got in. As freshmen, Greg confided in me that he fell in love with Emily. He spent every dollar he made on showering her with gifts, which she happily accepted. Emily came from a broken home with an alcoholic and physically cruel mother. The allure of a constant stream of presents must have been too strong for her to shut it down despite her lack of romantic interest. After perhaps a year of this dynamic, Greg's cousin and friend also fell for Emily. He asked her out, and she accepted. Though he never spoke of how this made him feel, I know it devastated him. To add context, we were now 16. Greg's transient mother came and went, this time leaving his older, unemployed brother behind. Greg now had to work 40-hour weeks to pay rent and support his brother while attending high school. Now, before I continue, you should know a few things about Greg. He was a gentle giant, naturally big and muscular, yet I had never witnessed even a hint of violence. We were so tight we usually knew what the other was thinking even without any communication. He maintained straight A's in his advanced courses throughout his difficult child and teenage years without even a momentary dip in performance. So the time frame is a bit fuzzy here, but I believe Greg's cousin had been dating Emily for about a week or 2. Emily asked to stay with Greg in his motel room so she could avoid her cruel mother for the night. Unfortunately, he obliged. Greg, Emily, and I were scheduled to work early the next morning. I remember being angry they had skipped their shifts without even giving me a heads up. The day manager, Justin, was acting very strange during my shift. He asked me to stop by his apartment afterward. I was now convinced something was very wrong. Justin relayed what the local police had told him. At some point during the night, Greg woke up and terminated Emily. He then walked to a cemetery and called 911. The sentencing was a spectacle for our small town. His public defenders did nothing of the sort, and he was sentenced to life without parole. Also, the local police pulled a Brendan Dassey on me. They wrote their own statement and made me, a 16-year-old with no representation, sign it. They even accidentally exposed me to graphic crime scene photos, which left me further traumatized. This all happened just one county over from the Stephen Avery ordeal. Never trust or work with Wisconsin police, never. Greg ended it all roughly a year after his conviction. I lost my two closest friends and haven't been able to form personal relationships in almost 2 decades since the incident. I mourn for my friends in colorless world every day and will likely do so until my final breath. Cherish your loved ones, they are what makes life worth living. Story 16. I went to high school with someone who turned out to be a serial terminator. He was a year behind me. I didn't really know him at all and don't recall ever speaking to him. He was odd. He mostly took young girls from rural areas. He roamed the country. I think he was looking for a girlfriend and had strange ideas about what that meant. In my class, there was a guy who turned out to be a convicted perpetrator of cruelty against minors. I was somewhat flabbergasted when I first heard about it because he was a very large, overweight person. My first thought was that most people could just outrun him since he could barely walk, but I guess he had a psychological hold on his victims. I still don't quite understand. He passed away in prison. Story 17. My roommate in college had a dealer named Omar. Omar would be really slow sometimes, so we called him Slowmar. Then he got really bad and wouldn't show up at all sometimes. We then referred to him as the no-show O. So Omar is consuming in his van one day. Some guy smells it and starts pestering Omar to sell him some. Omar refuses. The guy gets mad. A fight breaks out. Omar throws his van in drive to try and get away and accidentally runs the man over, terminating him in front of his 6-year-old daughter. Omar goes to prison for 6 years. We then called him OJ Mar. He became very religious in prison and came out preaching to everyone. He is now known as Holy Rolmar. And if you're enjoying the video like I did with that last one, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 18. I think I shared this one years ago, but I'll tell it here because it's not every day someone you were once close to ends up being a Terminator. I met G during my senior year in high school. We used to consume grass together before class, and because he sat behind me, we were always cutting up and joking around. This friendship grew over the last few months of high school, and after graduation, we still hung out a lot. He was a great guy, kind to a fault, generous, and all-around good friend. We kept in touch after high school until he began consuming substances. He wasn't a casual user. Do they truly exist? Though he tried to hide the fact from me. Finally, he just couldn't hide it. I tried to get him to get help, but he was unwilling, so we began to hang out a lot less. Not long after, he showed up at my mom's house when I wasn't around, asking her for $80. My mom, who was naive about substances, even told me that he looked like he was on something that was not and was acting so erratically that she made him leave. It was around this time that I fully distanced myself from him, and we eventually lost touch entirely. About 5 years later, it was all over our local news that G, desperate for substance money, had ended his grandmother's life, robbed her, and was seen by a neighbor trying to hide what he'd done in the backyard. He's now serving a life sentence. I knew that G would have a lot of issues with substances the more he did them. He had big substance issues around the time I stopped hanging out with him. His visit to my mom scared me a little when it happened, but never in a million years did I think G was capable of termination. It makes my blood run cold to think that it could have been any one of us terminated for substance money had I not cut ties when I did. Story 19. My cousin. When we were in our early teens, he moved out of state. He was always a little antisocial, but moving away took away the friends that he did have. Story goes that his best friend from back home came to visit for a week. He was 19 at the time. Things soured for the trip when he told her he had feelings for her, and she did not. This happened in the middle of the week, and they still had a couple more days before she left. One of the days, he planned some sort of camping trip or hike. He took his dad's pistol with him, and during the trip, he ended her life. They both went missing for a couple of days, and no one knew what happened until he was found a couple of states away with her remains in his trunk. I remember him going missing very well because the day before he had texted me, which I found weird, because he was always closer with my sister than with me. He was asking me what sort of books I was reading and if I had any recommendations. 2 years later, while in jail, he ended it all on the day he terminated her. Story 20. Family friend, let's call her Sarah. Years ago in the UK, met a new guy. Scottish, nice enough fella. Not too keen on talking about his reasons for moving to the other end of the country, though. A couple of months after they start going steady, Sarah finds a sawn-off shotgun under the seat in her car. She went to the police. Turns out he was on the run after a bank robbery went wrong in Glasgow where someone got terminated. He was the one who got away with the money, and the other gang members came looking for and found him. He admitted to terminating one of them and hiding it on Dartmoor and injuring the other one. He got life in prison. As far as I know, Sarah still visits him in prison. Story 21. I knew one in high school, didn't know him well, but would sit with him in the library during free period. He was artistic and would draw detailed pictures, mostly sci-fi like spaceships. He was overweight and a bit of a loner, but was cool to talk to. At the time, his family moved, but he was still going to my school. He knew he would have to go to a new school eventually and wasn't thrilled about it. He did go to a new school. He would go to his new school's track and sit on the stands every morning. He terminated a jogger with a compass in the woods. She was mid-30s, married with kids. Allegedly, he would try to talk to her and others apparently, and she blew him off, calling him a fat piece of garbage or something similar. I wasn't all that surprised since he told me that he would terminate kittens in the woods at his new home. He was nervously laughing when he told me this. He was convicted and sentenced. Not sure the length, but it was at least 30 years. This was in 1988. Story 22. A high school friend of mine, Brianna Rose Lee, committed a termination and ended it all. She terminated her son and herself in their apartment. From what I remember, she was always odd in school, but so was I. That's mainly why we got along. When I was visiting her house, she lived with just her dad and her brother. She had a dog named Roach. She was unique in every way. Her dad got put away for terminating his girlfriend. I heard that there may have been cruelty from her father when she was younger, but cannot confirm this. After her father was put away, she stayed with an aunt, and when visiting her, there was a beetle infestation in her room. There were hundreds, and they were all gathered around her ceiling light, and it was the strangest thing, but it didn't faze her at all. No one knows why she committed this act. Friends close to her say she showed no signs of problems. R.I.P. Bree. Story 23. I knew a guy who terminated a woman a few years ago. He was a bodybuilder and even won a Mr. Olympia contest one year. He was also a personal trainer, which is why he was in my circle. He came from a wealthy, working-class family. They owned a lot of farms and lucrative service industry equipment, that sort of thing. In his late 60s, he started developing nerve pain issues from mixing pesticides and agrochemicals with his bare hands. Idiopathic pain to a crippling degree. He got addicted to painkillers and then started using a lot of illegal substances, which he was introduced to from fellow travelers. Enter the woman. She was a substance dealer's partner who he also started frequenting after his wife screwed him over royally and left him. And she was always over at his house demanding money. Basically a crazy substance user and generally unstable personality and God knows what else. She was also in her 30s and was constantly armed with knives and the like. There was a dispute over substance money, and after she and her boyfriend left, she came back in. He grabbed a shotgun to fire warning shots in the air, and supposedly she said something like, "You don't have the guts," and grabbed the gun. When she grabbed the gun, she pulled it and the trigger was depressed. At least that's his version of events, but I believe it, to be honest. I've dealt with strung out people, and that sounds very realistic. The partner offered to testify at his trial in exchange for money, and he refused on principle. Probably not the best decision in retrospect. The police botched the investigation and couldn't determine if she had in fact grabbed the gun. He was out on bail for years despite violating probation constantly and was basically made an example of for making a mockery of the justice system. I don't know how it's legal, but he whizzed away his fortune with substances and legal fees, so he can't really appeal it anymore. He asked for a loan of a few $100,000 to fight the conviction. Not gonna happen, especially since he shacked up with some women who introduced him to substances. There's nothing sadder than someone who had no substance experience and then becomes a later life substance user. I met with him the day before to inspect some property he was selling, and he was telling me about the problems he was having. He would quit using substances, but then the enablers and the dealers would circle like vultures around him because an established guy with money and a substance problem was like a jackpot or ATM to them. He even told me about this crazy woman who carries around knives and all kinds of other details. It felt surreal to hear something happen hours after you saw someone like that. To be clear, he wasn't a personal friend, but an associate who was friends with my associates and friends. There was never any indication that this dude is totally going to terminate someone or anything wrong with him other than a substance problem. Story 24. Worked in a fab shop as a supervisor a year ago. We went through welders and maintenance guys all the time with a high turnover because we used a temp service that hated us and would give us terrible workers. We hired a new maintenance guy, and he showed up on the first Monday with 3 sets of toolboxes in his truck. He missed the rest of the week but showed up on the next Monday driving a car, and he walked all scarred up saying he got into an accident. The guy actually brought in the hospital notes and everything, so it wasn't a lie. He just wanted to come in and say he didn't quit. A few months go by and he doesn't miss a day of work. He was the nicest guy there and always helped any of the workers with anything that broke down in the shop. He would even go out of his way and help guys fix their lawnmowers and cars on the weekends. Every Thursday at our work, we would have a shop meeting at lunch with all the workers and just talk about the week in production and whatnot. One day I walked in on a Tuesday morning and our ops manager said we were having a morning meeting. He proceeded to tell everyone that a worker would not be with us anymore, and if we wanted more details, we should read the news. Turns out the nice maintenance guy actually terminated his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. The guy actually ended his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend's life and then, according to the news, try to hide what he'd done in a wooded area. He used a truck that he wrecked, and apparently the car he took to work every day had meth and the weapon in it. And to this day, I'll never forget my favorite conversation with him. Me, hey, can I borrow this pair of snips? Him, yeah, just make sure you bring them back, buddy. Me, oh yeah? Or what? Story 25. An ex-girlfriend's brother is currently in for termination. I would see him often, and normally he would keep to himself and play games. Sometimes he would ask me to help on a hard part of a game or would watch a movie with us. He was also 2 grades above me and his sister while in high school, and always seemed like a guy who liked joking around. At least when he was sober, that was true. Unfortunately, when he drank, he became aggressive and angry for the smallest reasons. And by the time I was 19, he was drinking daily. The man he terminated was 36 and the brother of my best friend's now wife. The story, as I know it, is that they were drinking together often and decided to go for a walk in the early morning, where he confronted his victim about committing acts of cruelty against him while they were drinking over the last couple of years and apparently also that night. His victim told him that he had liked what happened and was just in the closet, and that sent him into a rage. He ended his life and disposed of the remains in a nearby lake, and later something was discovered that brought the police in. Story 26. He was the new guy at school, cute, became popular quickly. We were friends, but I noticed some moments where he was cruel and cold. He thought he was smarter than everyone and he was impatient. He didn't want to be there. His parents sent him to live with his strict conservative preacher grandparents. One night at a party, he kept pestering me to go somewhere alone with him in my car. I didn't want to, so I did not. He pouted and acted like a child. In retrospect, I think he had decided that my life was worthless and that terminating me to take my car would have been an easy thing for him to do. But there I was, refusing to do something he wanted me to do. And it's really funny to me now because I probably would have gone if it were not for one of the last parties of my senior year in high school, and one of the last times I'd be with those people ever, or if this other guy I liked had not been there. He ended up terminating his parents to take their car and he went to Mexico. He terminated his elderly grandparents who probably did love him because he couldn't wait the year or so to graduate high school and get the heck out on better terms. He turned himself in soon after that because I guess he thought about the reality of living as a fugitive in a country where he knew no one and was a teenager must have hit him upside the head. He spent about 25 or so years in prison. He's a free man these days and married to the girl he was dating when he terminated his grandparents. She was a dramatic mess back then and has had some substance problems in the interim. I don't keep in touch. I just Google every now and then because I want to know where he is, since I know in my heart he was going to terminate me one night because in his mind I was nothing. Story 27. Was friends with a guy in middle school who moved to a different school district in the 7th grade, so we kind of fell out of touch, but I remember he was a nice, friendly guy, bit of a dork, no violent temper or anything. Pick your average goofy kid and you'll get pretty close to what he was like. 20 years later, I find an article in my local newspaper. He had gotten into an argument with his girlfriend and decided terminating her was the best way to end it. Now here's the messed up part. He called his mom after doing it and told her what he had done, and then she heard his girlfriend calling for help. When she told him to call 911, he put the phone down and terminated her. He was later charged, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Story 28. My husband and I were at a bar one Friday afternoon getting our drink on and got to know this cool guy who was sitting there drinking alone, waiting for his wife to finish some sort of class. We hung out for like 3 hours and decided to meet up with him and his wife later that night, exchange numbers, all that jazz. Later that night, when we met up with them at a rooftop bar, this man was next level intoxicated. When I think back, it wouldn't have surprised me that he was on some sort of substances. He had this look where his eyes were completely empty, but he was still functioning. Anyways, he gets my husband alone and goes into detail about how he terminated a homeless man and that it was the best feeling he had ever had in his life and that my husband should join him on his next termination. He then proceeded to explain that there was a whole network of people who are terminators for the thrill and meet up all over the country in secret to talk about their experiences. He then mentioned how he wanted his next target to be a middle-class person. My husband stepped away from the bar quickly. I learned later to throw up because this conversation made him physically ill. He was gone for maybe 3 minutes, in which there was enough time for the terminator to come over to me, minding my own business with a different group of people, and begin talking about the best way to terminate someone. Now, mind you, I had no clue of the conversation he just had with my husband. My husband comes back from the restroom, and we both just look at each other and agree to book it. We ran home like never before. I couldn't sleep that night. Story 29. I have a friend who used to live in a very bad part of town. He was robbed and harmed several times by locals. One night after being robbed and harmed, he went to his place, got a shotgun, went to the local bar, and terminated one of them. He then turned himself in. He was poorly represented. His parents would not let anyone go to his parole hearings. He was a model prisoner, staying at a minimum security prison. He was eventually paroled. He's one of the kindest, smartest, and most creative people I know. I would trust him to look after my kids. I would trust him with a sack of my money and the keys to my house. He terminated a violent punk and lost years of his life, but he's not bitter. He started his own business, lives modestly, and is still creative. I am happy to call him a friend. Story 30. 5 who, for sure, terminated someone. Another 3 or 4 at least who more than likely terminated someone. I'm a criminal defense attorney and it's part of the job. For the most part, they're just people. People who, for one reason or another, made a huge, terrible, irrevocable mistake, but they're just people. And since they're just people, some of them are smart, some are dumb. I personally liked some of them and disliked others. Several of them were shockingly young when the termination occurred. At least one was horribly unlucky. He fired one shot from a crappy pistol that somehow went through a window more than 100 yards away and terminated somebody. At least one was probably an accident. He was wrestling with 2 other people over a shotgun. It went off and terminated one of the people he was wrestling with. There was some thought that the other person, a female, may have actually pulled the trigger, but we couldn't prove it. Another was very likely mentally ill. He terminated the person driving the vehicle he was riding in. Another probably just snapped. He harmed over and over and over the person who very likely committed acts of cruelty against him for years. I guess what I'm trying to convey is that I can't think of anyone who terminated another person who was evil. Pitiful, yes, but not evil. Some of the offenders, on the other hand. Story 31. Grew up with a friend of the group and met this guy's dad a few times. I also knew the dad by first name because he hung out at a members-only bar with some of my family members. He was an intoxicated person who was hired to terminate another guy's wife and make it look like a robbery. They busted the guy with the purse still in his closet and he told the whole story to the cops. The ending result was the terminator and husband in jail with the wife on the ground. A handful of years later, the friend of the group breaks his back in a car crash, gets a big settlement, and gets hooked on painkillers. Eventually runs out of money and starts robbing banks under a weird pseudo-bandit name. Eventually he gets caught and sent to jail. We sometimes joke they are now in the same federal prison. Story 32. 2, actually. The first was a childhood friend who went to a lot of punk shows. One night there was a brawl at the bar because they accidentally booked a supremacist band. My friend is Jewish and got into the brawl with the troublemakers in question. He ended up slamming a guy's face into the concrete outside. The guy needed reconstructive surgery and he passed away of complications in the hospital. My friend was never charged and a malpractice payout was made to the family. The second was someone I met on OkCupid. She terminated her grandmother. She was the sole provider for her grandmother, who was unable to feed herself but was still cognizant a good portion of the time. She decided she didn't want to do that anymore, so she just locked the door to the room and came back a few days later. I don't talk to either of them anymore. Story 33. I went to school with 2 kids that terminated another classmate. The 2 terminators were a couple. The guy was always off and a little bit scary. Him and I weren't really friends, but we did know each other and poke fun every once in a while. But he did make a lot of people uncomfortable. He was even part of the search groups helping look for the people he terminated. Super messed up. The girl, on the other hand, everyone was surprised. She was part of a perfect little Mormon family, so when we found out she was involved, it was crazy. She even went back to school and wasn't caught until she confessed like 3 weeks later. Story 34. There was an older guy that would come to the bar I used to go to. He mostly kept to himself until he would get intoxicated and then give people money to play Led Zeppelin on the jukebox. One night it's crowded and he hands me $5 and says, "Play some Zeppelin." So I go and pick some Zeppelin songs, capping it off with Stairway, his favorite. Well, since it was crowded, his songs were way down in the queue. I'm starting to worry that he thinks I took his $5 and played Miley Cyrus or some stuff. Eventually I had to leave, still worried that this guy thinks I stole his $5. My brother was there a little longer than me and said that the Zeppelin guy left shortly after I did. He also mentioned that this guy did some time in prison for termination. Story 35. This'll probably get buried. My grandfather, not biological, my grandma remarried when her kids were adults, terminated a man once. If I remember the story correctly, he was at a bar with some buddies after work and got into a fight, and he ended up terminating someone. He was a handyman, so he was a pretty strong guy, and from what I've heard, he was an angry, intoxicated person as well. He got convicted of second-degree termination, was almost given the death penalty, but ended up getting life with the possibility of parole. He changed while he was on the inside, kept in touch with my grandma, and they eventually got married. He found God and started doing charity work for the other prisoners. Fast forward 25 years, and he's out now. Quit drinking, is fully involved in the lives of his grandchildren, and he and my grandmother run a house that brings in people who are recovering substance users and helps get them on their feet again. He's one of the greatest human beings I know. It's wild to think he used to be so different, and if he hadn't committed that awful crime, he probably wouldn't have changed into the man he is today. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.